Imagine you're about to say something that could destroy a friendship, end a career, or change the course of your entire life. Your words are loaded and ready to fire. But then, for just a moment, you pause. In that single second of hesitation, you remember something the ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius said over 2,500 years ago. The gentleman is distressed by his lack of ability, not by the fact that men do not recognize his ability. What if I told you that this pause, this moment of reflection before speaking, could be the difference between wisdom and foolishness, between building bridges and burning them down? Today, we live in an age where words travel faster than thought. We tweet before we think, text before we reflect, and speak before we consider the consequences. Social media has given everyone a megaphone, but very few people have learned how to use it wisely. Cancel culture, online harassment, damaged relationships, and destroyed reputations often stem from one common source: the failure to master our tongues. But here's the fascinating part. Over 2 millennia ago, a Chinese teacher named Confucius understood something about human nature and the power of words that we're only beginning to rediscover today. He didn't just tell people to think before they speak like some fortune cookie wisdom. Instead, he developed a sophisticated philosophy about communication, restraint, and the art of knowing when to remain silent. Confucius believed that mastering your tongue wasn't just about avoiding trouble or being polite. It was about something much deeper. It was about becoming the kind of person who could navigate life's complexities with grace, build lasting relationships, and ultimately become what he called a gentleman, or junzi. This wasn't about gender. It was about becoming a person of character, regardless of whether you were male or female. So why did Confucius place such enormous emphasis on controlling our speech? And more importantly, how can his ancient wisdom help us navigate our modern world of instant communication and viral conversations? The answers might surprise you, and they definitely have the power to transform how you communicate for the rest of your life. Let's start with a story that perfectly illustrates what Confucius was getting at. There once was a student who came to Confucius complaining about another student who had said something false about him behind his back. The student was angry and wanted to confront his accuser publicly to set the record straight and defend his reputation. But Confucius gave him advice that seemed counterintuitive. The superior man is easy to serve but difficult to please. If you try to please him in any way that is not in accordance with the way, he will not be pleased. But in his employment of others, he uses them according to their capacity. The inferior man is difficult to serve but easy to please. This wasn't just about the immediate conflict. Confucius was teaching his student that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. By choosing not to engage in public arguments or defend himself against every criticism, the student would demonstrate his character more effectively than any words could. This is the essence of mastering your tongue according to Confucian philosophy. Knowing not just what to say, but when not to say it. This principle becomes even more relevant when we consider how Confucius viewed the relationship between our inner character and our outward speech. He believed that our words were a direct reflection of our moral development. As he put it, if language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this is not done, morals and art will deteriorate. If morals and art deteriorate, justice will go astray. If justice goes astray, the people will stand about in helpless confusion. Notice how Confucius traces a direct line from imprecise or careless speech to the breakdown of society itself. This wasn't hyperbole. He genuinely believed that the way we use language shapes not just our personal relationships, but the entire fabric of civilization. When people don't say what they mean, trust erodes. When trust erodes, cooperation becomes impossible. When cooperation breaks down, communities fall apart. This insight is remarkably prescient when we look at our contemporary challenges. How many political scandals begin with careless words? How many business relationships crumble because of miscommunication? How many families are torn apart by things said in anger that can never be taken back? Confucius understood that our tongues are among the most powerful tools we possess. And like any powerful tool, they can be used to build or to destroy. But mastering your tongue, according to Confucius, isn't just about avoiding negative consequences. It's also about maximizing the positive impact of your words. He taught that speech should serve specific purposes: to educate, to inspire virtue, to build relationships, and to promote harmony. Random chatter, gossip, or speaking just to fill. Silence were seen as wastes of our precious capacity for meaningful communication. Consider this quote from Confucius. "The wise find pleasure in water. The virtuous find pleasure in hills. The wise are active. The virtuous are tranquil. The wise are joyful. The virtuous are long-lived." What does this have to do with speech? Everything. Confucius is describing two different approaches to life and communication. The wise are like water, adapting to any situation, finding the most efficient path forward. They speak when necessary and remain silent when speech serves no purpose. The virtuous are like hills, stable and enduring. Their words carry weight because they are measured and thoughtful. The key insight here is that effective communication isn't about being clever or impressive. It's about being appropriate to the situation and helpful to others. Confucius would often remain silent for long periods during conversations, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was waiting for the right moment when his words would have the maximum positive impact. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of Confucian communication philosophy: the discipline of listening. In our culture, we often think of communication skills as being about speaking well. But Confucius taught that true mastery of the tongue begins with mastery of the ear. As he said, "When we see men of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see men of a contrary character, we should turn inwards and examine ourselves." This quote reveals something profound about how Confucius approached conversations. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He was actively studying the people he was speaking with, learning from their virtues and their mistakes. Every conversation was an opportunity for moral and intellectual growth, but only if you were really listening. Modern neuroscience has validated what Confucius intuited centuries ago. When we're preparing to speak, our brains literally reduce their capacity to process incoming information. We become worse listeners when we're focused on our own response, but when we genuinely listen first, we not only understand others better, we also speak more effectively when our turn comes. This is why Confucius emphasized what he called Ren, often translated as benevolence or humaneness. Ren isn't just about being nice to people. It's about recognizing the fundamental interconnectedness of human experience. When you truly understand that your words affect others in ways you might never fully comprehend, you naturally become more careful about how you use them. Let's explore how this philosophy applied to different types of relationships. Confucius had very specific ideas about how we should speak to parents, to rulers, to friends, and to students. These weren't just social conventions. They were strategic approaches to communication designed to strengthen the fabric of society. When speaking to authority figures, for instance, Confucius advocated what might seem like excessive deference. But this wasn't about being servile. It was about understanding power dynamics and using them wisely. As he said, "To go beyond is as wrong as to fall short." Speaking truth to power requires tremendous skill. If you're too direct, you'll be dismissed or punished. If you're too indirect, your message won't get through. The art lies in finding the middle path that allows your voice to be heard while maintaining the relationship. This principle applies remarkably well to modern workplace communication. How many good ideas are rejected not because they lack merit, but because they were presented in a way that threatened someone's ego or status? Confucius would suggest that truly caring about the outcome of a conversation sometimes means caring, less about getting credit for your ideas and more about finding a way to make them heard and implemented. With friends and peers, Confucius advocated a different approach. Here, the emphasis was on mutual cultivation and gentle correction. Have no friends not equal to yourself, he taught, not because you should be elitist, but because friendship should be a relationship of mutual growth. True friends challenge each other to become better people, but they do it with love and respect. This means that mastering your tongue in friendships involves knowing how to offer constructive criticism without damaging the relationship. Confucius suggested that this requires impeccable timing, genuine care for the other person's well-being, and absolute honesty about your own motivations. Are you speaking up because you truly want to help your friend grow, or because their behavior somehow threatens or annoys you? When it came to teaching or speaking to those who sought guidance, Confucius employed yet another approach. He was famous for his method of questioning rather than lecturing. Instead of simply telling people what to think, he would ask questions that led them to discover insights for themselves. I do not open up the truth to one who is not eager to get knowledge, nor help out any who is not anxious to explain himself. When I have presented one corner of a subject to anyone, and he cannot learn the other three from it, I do not repeat my lesson. This quote reveals something crucial about the Confucian approach to persuasion. Real influence doesn't come from overpowering someone with arguments or manipulating them with clever rhetoric. It comes from helping them think more clearly about issues they already care about. This requires tremendous restraint and patience. You have to resist the urge to show off your own knowledge and instead focus on drawing out the wisdom that already exists in others. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of Confucian communication philosophy is what he taught about dealing with conflict and criticism. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice or the sharpest comeback, Confucius advocated something that might seem like weakness: strategic silence and thoughtful response. The gentleman is distressed by his lack of ability, not by the fact that men do not recognize his ability. This quote gets to the heart of why so many of our communication problems stem from ego rather than substance. When someone criticizes us or fails to appreciate our efforts, our natural instinct is to defend ourselves or demand recognition. But Confucius suggests that this reaction reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what really matters. If you're truly confident in your abilities and committed to continuous improvement, then criticism becomes valuable feedback rather than a personal attack. If recognition comes, wonderful. If it doesn't, you haven't lost anything essential. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions, so you don't need to waste energy trying to control or influence those opinions through argument or persuasion. This doesn't mean being passive or accepting injustice. Rather, it means choosing your battles wisely and fighting them effectively. Sometimes the most powerful response to unfair criticism is to simply continue doing excellent work. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to prove yourself, right through actions rather than words. Confucius also understood that anger and strong emotions are the enemy of effective communication. The gentleman understands what is moral. The small man understands what is profitable. When we're angry, we tend to focus on what we can gain from a conversation. The satisfaction of proving someone wrong, the feeling of dominance that comes from having the last word, the immediate relief of expressing our frustration. But this focus on immediate gratification usually undermines our long-term interests. The temporary satisfaction of winning an argument often costs us relationships, opportunities, and respect. Confucius taught that truly intelligent people play a longer game. They're willing to lose individual battles in service of winning the war. This is particularly relevant in our age of social media conflicts. How many people have damaged their reputations or careers by engaging in online arguments that they won, but that ultimately cost them far more than they gained? How many relationships have been destroyed by text message exchanges that escalated because each person had to have the last word? Confucius would likely view most social media arguments as examples of what he called small man thinking. You might get the temporary satisfaction of posting a clever comeback, but what have you really accomplished? Have you changed anyone's mind? Have you strengthened any relationships? Have you contributed to the overall level of wisdom and compassion in the world? The Confucian alternative is what he called rectification of names. This is a complex philosophical concept, but at its core, it's about using language precisely and honestly. Instead of using words to score points or manipulate emotions, we should use them to accurately describe reality and promote understanding. This means avoiding exaggeration, hyperbole, and emotional manipulation in our communication. It means being precise about what we actually know versus what we're speculating about. It means acknowledging the limitations of our own perspective and the validity of other viewpoints, even when we disagree with them. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance, Confucius taught. This intellectual humility should permeate our communication style. Instead of speaking as if we have all the answers, we should speak as people who are genuinely curious about truth and willing to have our minds changed by compelling evidence or reasoning. This approach to communication has practical benefits, beyond just being more intellectually honest. When people sense that you're genuinely open to learning from them, they become much more receptive to learning from you. When they feel heard and respected, even in disagreement, they're more likely to consider your perspective seriously. But implementing these principles in daily life requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires what Confucius called cultivation, a systematic approach to personal development that includes regular self-examination and practice. "Examine myself 3 times each day," Confucius said. "In my work with others, have I always been loyal? In my relations with friends, have I always been trustworthy? Have I practiced the precepts I have preached?" Notice that 2 of these 3 daily self-examinations directly relate to communication. Loyalty in work relationships often comes down to speaking honestly but constructively about problems and opportunities. Trustworthiness with friends depends largely on saying what you mean and meaning what you say. The third question is perhaps the most challenging: practicing what you preach. It's easy to give advice about communication. It's much harder to actually implement that advice consistently in your own life, especially when you're stressed, tired, or emotionally triggered. This is why Confucius emphasized the importance of what he called lie, often translated as ritual or proper conduct. These weren't empty ceremonies, but practical habits designed to reinforce virtuous behavior even when our emotions were pulling us in other directions. In terms of communication, this might mean developing specific practices, pausing for 3 seconds before responding to criticism, asking clarifying questions before offering advice, or writing angry emails but waiting 24 hours before sending them. The specific practices matter less than the underlying principle of creating structures that support wise communication, even when wisdom doesn't come naturally. Confucius also recognized that mastering your tongue is not just an individual pursuit. It requires what he called wen, or cultural refinement. We learn how to communicate effectively by studying examples of excellent communication and surrounding ourselves with people who model the kind of discourse we want to emulate. This is particularly challenging in our current cultural moment. Much of our public discourse is characterized by exactly the kind of communication that Confucius warned against: inflammatory rhetoric, personal attacks, deliberate misrepresentation of opposing views, and the prioritization of entertainment. Value over truth or wisdom. If we want to develop better communication habits, we may need to be intentional about curating our information diet. This doesn't mean creating an echo chamber or avoiding different perspectives. Rather, it means seeking out sources and conversations that demonstrate how to disagree respectfully, how to engage with complex issues thoughtfully, and how to prioritize understanding over being right. The ultimate goal of mastering your tongue, according to Confucius, is not just personal success or even harmonious relationships. though both of these are important benefits. The ultimate goal is contributing to what he called the rectification of society. He believed that if enough individuals learned to communicate wisely, the effects would ripple outward to transform entire communities and eventually civilization itself. This might seem impossibly idealistic, but consider how communication patterns actually spread through social networks. When one person in a group consistently responds to conflict with curiosity rather than defensiveness, others often begin to model that behavior. When someone demonstrates how to disagree without being disagreeable, it gives others permission to do the same. Conversely, when prominent figures in business, politics, or entertainment model destructive communication patterns, those patterns proliferate as well. The person who interrupts constantly in meetings teaches others that interruption is acceptable. The leader who responds to criticism with personal attacks normalizes that approach for everyone in their organization. This is why Confucius placed such emphasis on the moral responsibility of people in positions of influence. He who exercises government by means of his virtue may be compared to the North Polar Star, which keeps its place while all the stars turn around it. True leadership, in other words, isn't about commanding others through force or manipulation. It's about becoming the kind of person that others naturally want to emulate. And since so much of our influence is expressed through communication, learning to speak and listen wisely becomes a form of public service. As we approach the end of our exploration of Confucian communication philosophy, it's worth asking, what would actually change in your life if you took these principles seriously? What would be different about your relationships if you truly listened before speaking? How might your career trajectory change if you became known as someone who could be trusted with sensitive information and who always spoke truthfully but tactfully? What kind of parent, partner, or friend would you be if you measured your words carefully and spoke with genuine care for others' well-being? How might your community be different if you consistently modeled respectful disagreement and curious inquiry rather than argumentative debate? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical challenges that could reshape your daily experience in profound ways. But implementing them requires more than good intentions. It requires the kind of systematic practice and self-examination that Confucius advocated. The ancient Chinese philosopher understood something that we often forget in our rush to express ourselves. Silence is not the absence of communication, but a form of communication itself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is listen without offering solutions. Sometimes the most persuasive argument is the one you don't make. Sometimes the most powerful response to provocation is no response at all. But this doesn't mean being passive or avoiding difficult conversations. Rather, it means approaching communication with the same kind of strategic thinking that you would bring to any other important skill. It means recognizing that your words have consequences that extend far beyond your immediate intentions and taking responsibility for those consequences. The cautious seldom err, Confucius taught. In our age of instant communication and viral content, this ancient wisdom takes on new urgency. Every text message, every social media post, every casual comment has the potential to be screenshot, shared, and taken out of context. The prudent person in the 21st century must be even more careful with their words than Confucius could have imagined. Yet this caution should not lead to paralysis or insincerity. Confucius also said, if you would govern a state of 1,000 chariots, you must pay strict attention to business, be true to your word, be economical in expenditure, and love the people. Being true to your word doesn't just mean keeping promises. It means speaking authentically from your deepest values and convictions. It means having the courage to say what needs to be said, even when it's difficult or unpopular. The art lies in finding ways to speak your truth that actually advance the causes you care about, rather than simply making you feel better about having expressed yourself. This brings us back to where we started. That moment of pause before speaking, that Split second when you choose wisdom over impulse, strategy over emotion, love over ego. Confucius believed that civilization itself hangs in the balance of these micro-decisions that we make dozens of times every day. In our interconnected world, where individual voices can reach global audiences and where words can literally change the course of history, this responsibility has never been greater. But neither has the opportunity. Each of us has more potential influence than any ordinary person in Confucius's time could have dreamed of. The question is, what will you do with that influence? Will you use your voice to build bridges or to tear them down? Will you speak in ways that elevate the discourse or that drag it into the mud? Will you master your tongue, or will you let your tongue master you? The choice is yours, and you'll make it fresh with every word you speak for the rest of your life. But now you have the wisdom of one of history's greatest teachers to guide you in making those choices well. As Confucius himself said, by 3 methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is noblest. Second, by imitation, which is easiest. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. Today, you have the opportunity to learn by reflection, before experience teaches you the hard way why the ancient master was right about the power of the tongue. The words you speak today will echo into tomorrow in ways you cannot predict. Choose them wisely.